This is going to be the last video lecture of the course. I really have to say thank you for your forbearance. I am a rookie at video lectures. I hope these have met your needs. I'm trying the best that I can, so hopefully we'll be back in the classroom in the fall and we'll be able to see everybody again. So what I want to do is supplement the text a bit, and I want to do this in a contrast to the marginal revolution videos on international trade. They're a bit more pro-free trade than I am, and I want to discuss and review some of the arguments against free trade. In other words, putting up a tariff, a tax on imported goods, or perhaps a quota where we only allow a limited amount of goods to come in. These are, done because people say maybe we have to limit free trade. Now, one of the arguments is national security. So picture, if you will, a situation where the United States decides, look, it's cheaper to import our fighter jets from another nation. If we were to go to war with that other nation, the result would be they probably wouldn't sell us fighter jets. About 20 some years ago, the United Kingdom and Argentina, believe it or not, got into a war over some islands out in the middle of the Atlantic called the Falkland Islands, and Britain wanted to attack, but they found out some people wouldn't sell them attack helicopters. So you can say, look, for national security, we need to maintain certain industries. I think this is valid. Right now, wars have become very computerized, weaponized, high tech. So if the United States didn't have a semiconductor industry, we might be in trouble if we were to go to war. We see something similar right now with the COVID crisis with ventilators. If we don't make enough ventilators, if we import them, another nation might say, hey, we're going to use them ourselves, we're not going to sell them to you. So most economists, in fact, I don't think there's an exception, would say this really is an argument in some cases for limiting free trade, but sometimes we limit free trade for other reasons. So the United States has a quota, a limit on how much sugar we will import. Why? I can't really give you a good reason for that, except for the fact it really helps domestic sugar producers if they don't have competition. Point, if it's truly national security, you might make a case for protecting American industries so they can produce the goods we need that are critical, that are crucial, especially in times of war, but don't extend that too far. So I'd say basically this is valid in some cases. There's an argument called the infant industry argument. Suppose there's an industry a nation wants to start. So, let me give you an example. India wanted to develop an automobile industry. What they did, it was called a Tata. What they did was they put a very high tax on imported automobiles. This would enable the domestic producer to produce without competition that would undercut them. Now, the United States actually did this in the 1700s and the 1800s. We put tariffs, very high taxes on imported manufactured goods. So the idea was if manufactured goods, let's say stoves, plows, lanterns, whatever, carriages, if they tended to be imported from Britain, and the United States was to put a tax on imported goods, then we could start an industry in the United States and that would get started, and we too could become a manufacturing nation. By the way, do you know who proposed these very high tariffs in the United States? I bet you've heard of this person. In fact, he was so famous, they made a musical out of him. Yeah, Alexander Hamilton was the one who came up with the ideas of these tariffs in manufacturing. Well, the problem is, although you can put on these tariffs or taxes on imported goods to give a domestic industry a chance to get started, frequently they're left on too long for political reasons. Wouldn't Ohio Wesleyan love it if there was a tax that was put on Denison and Kenyon and Worcester that demanded that students pay $15,000 a year more? Oh, we'd love that. So let our competitors make them charge more. That would give us an advantage. But if we leave these tariffs on too long, the consumer, the customer, faces high prices. That's the downside of putting on tariffs. It's more expensive for the consumer. Brazil did this with computers. The book talks a little bit about this. And the idea is that Brazil wanted to get a computer industry started. Sounds like a really good idea. So they taxed imported computers, and as a result, computers were very expensive to give the Brazilian computer industry a chance to get going. But the problem was they left this on for a long time. So if you were in the travel industry, the finance industry, if you were trying to do IT work, keeping track of stock, in retail, the result was you found computers were very expensive in Brazil. They were very expensive because of these tariffs, and as the result, even though Brazil found they didn't develop much of a computer industry, their industries in things like travel, in finance, in inventory control, they were set back because they found the cost of buying a computer was so high because of the tariffs. Bottom line, the infant industry argument has a very mixed record. For political reasons, people sometimes leave it on too long. If somebody's politically powerful in industry, they can keep the tariffs on for a long time. Now, here's another argument. You hear this one all the time. And by the way, the bottom line is sometimes this works, but people might leave it on too long. Other nations have low wages. Americans can't compete. So, my hometown of Detroit, people are saying, well, look, if a worker in Mexico makes a car, their wages are so much lower, we can't compete against these low-wage Mexicans. Well, we have to think about this a little bit more carefully. If we have low wages and low productivity, then the worker is not producing anything more for what we pay them. It's not really a problem if there are low wages and low productivity. But if there's not low productivity, but there's low wages, South Korea, China, Taiwan, Thailand, we do get cheap goods. In other nations, if wages are lower and productivity is not that low, they can send goods to America, and the result is that we get very cheap goods. I'm going to bet that at least 90% of you that are listening to this, if you were to look at the label on your clothes right now, you would find it was made in another country. Now, that's the good news. We get cheap goods. The bad news, American workers lose their jobs. So we see that employment in the automobile industry has declined, and the American steel industry has declined, and the American clothing industry has declined. Why? Because other areas of the world, the result is that they're able to produce the goods a lot more cheaply. Well, you know what? In the real world, things can sometimes be very complicated. Suppose what we do is we put a tariff or a quota on imported goods. This is a chart I actually took from the book because it was so darn good. This is the annual cost to consumers in higher prices for every job we save. Good news. In the sugar industry, we can save jobs by a quota. It costs about $800,000 plus each year for every job that we wind up saving. Ouch, that's a lot of money. People in the sugar industry might be making $30,000 a year. It's not a high-paying industry. So we can save those jobs, but it costs us about $800,000 a job in the form of higher prices. You can see things like we can get orange juice from Brazil, actually, but we limit orange juice imports. I think we put a tariff on that. That's over $600,000. A lot of products, it's very expensive to save a job. So why do we have these tariffs and quotas? Well, the result is that whenever we lose a job, the pain is concentrated. Maybe 1,000 workers lose their job. And they will, it'll be a news story. They will lobby very hard to save their jobs. If we wind up saving 50 cents, if every American saves 50 cents a year on sugar, they don't notice it. The loss in terms of jobs is concentrated. The benefit is spread out over many people. The loss when we allow imports, the loss in workers' jobs is concentrated in a few people, the benefit in lower prices is small, but it's over the entire country. So the result is the people that wind up paying the higher prices when we do limit imports, these people don't really notice the higher prices, but the people that lose their jobs if we didn't have tariffs notice it, and they will fight very hard politically to retain these tariffs, and it's very expensive. So what's the bottom line? It's an expensive way to save jobs. And I would argue that we should do a better job in the United States of retraining workers who do lose their jobs. By the way, something to note, other nations can retaliate with their own tariffs. So if we put a tariff on imported goods, they'll put a tariff on ours. President Trump put tariffs on Chinese imports, and the result was the Chinese put tariffs on American imports of soybeans, pork, and certain types of equipment. By the way, just before the start of the Great Depression, we passed an act that raised tariffs, the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Those were two senators. I love that name. And if we put tariffs on and other nations retaliate, we don't export, we don't sell as much abroad, and that hurts aggregate demand. So a couple other arguments against free trade. One of them is child labor. Turns out if you're making a rug, children have small hands, and it's really great to make a rug. And certainly we don't want to exploit children. I have a wonderful 8-year-old granddaughter, Ovidia, who's very, very handy, and I don't want to see her working in a factory making rugs. But, a very wise student of mine pointed out to me that it's too simple to just say, let's ban child labor. Okay, so we say we will not buy any rug that's made by child labor. Great. What if that child is the sole support of his family? What are we going to do to help the family? Well, the child should be in school. Oh, are we going to build schools? It's very simple to say there should be no child labor. But what's going to happen to that child and his family? That's a little bit more complicated. Now, people have said we can get certificates. And, this is actually what they do. For imported rugs, there's a certificate that says no child labor was used in making this rug. And this way we can limit child labor. I've also talked to students from third world nations, and they say it's not that expensive to buy a certificate that says no child labor was used, regardless of whether or not you use child labor or not. In other words, you can buy the certificate that says no child labor was used, and whether or not you used it is irrelevant. There's corruption. So this is hard to enforce, and what's Plan B? So it's an argument against free trade, but it's difficult to enforce. Pollution. The United States borders Mexico, and on the border we have maquiladoras. The root there, for those of you that studied Spanish, is maquilar, to make. And a maquiladora is an assembly plant on the Mexican-United States border in Mexico. And a lot of times there's a lot of pollution. And if the pollution goes into the river and the river flows into the Rio Grande in the United States, the pollution carries over into the United States. So if we trade with Mexico, we might be causing pollution in the United States. But the problem here is you need to stop the pollution. Rather than not trading with Mexico, a treaty might be a better way. Just because we don't buy the products from the maquiladora doesn't mean that it might not get sold in Germany, England, somewhere else. So rather than refusing to buy Mexican products, it might be a better thing to just work out a treaty if we want to stop pollution. So what's the bottom line to all this? The bottom line is you can have arguments against free trade. You can put in quotas. You can put in tariffs, but use this with caution. There certainly are some problems that you have to consider. So once again, thank you for your patience. I really am glad we had half a semester to be together in person. I really felt like I got to know every one of you, just a little bit. I wish I would have gotten to know you more. I do hope you use what you've learned in this course, and I do hope to see you in another course. Take care and do stay well.